Good afternoon, and welcome everyone joining this session, be it offline or online, as is the case for some of us. In the context of the overarching topic of today's conference of rising to the challenge, we will be more particularly addressing how to better support family and care. My name is Laetitia Thyssen. I'm the policy analyst for gender equality at FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, which I'm delighted to represent here today as the main partner in this milestone event in our joint activities together with the Fabian Society. As the leading progressive think tank at European level, FEPS has been looking very closely at the connections between care and inequalities, and as such kept a constant focus of attention on what has been now finally and widely acknowledged as an essential activity in human life, even if it remained so invisible for all too long. So I'm particularly honored to chair this exchange with this impressive set of speakers today, addressing some of the most timely questions posed by the challenges of care, which is now finally gaining traction, including in EU decision-making spheres, with the European Commission just recently making a commitment to a European care strategy. So countries across Europe, including the UK, have been seeking to build back from what is now known as a severe care crisis, resulting from modern economies' failure to give care the central place that it actually deserves in any well-functioning society. And therefore, the discussion today offers a very timely opportunity to address how to build back better. So let me start by very warmly welcoming our speakers, briefly introducing them to our audience before giving them the floor to kick off this exchange. Our first speaker will be Karen Smith, who has been MP for Bristol South since 2015 and who is currently a Shadow Minister for Health and Social Care. Secondly, we have Polly Toynbee, who is a socio-political commentator for The Guardian, and after being the BBC social affairs editor. Our third speaker is Ben Cooper, who also joined us as a senior researcher at the Fabians and who previously worked for Labour MP, having studied development studies and British politics. And last but not least, let me introduce you to Cathy Gose, Chief Executive of KIDS, and who brings also to the panel 27 years of experience in the social sector and previously served as Chief Executive of Women's Aid Federation of England, the Electoral Reform Society, and the British Institute for Human Rights. So now that we know almost everything about each other, and without further ado, I would like to give the floor to MP Karen Smith, as the policy-making voice in this panel, asking her more particularly what she believes can or should parties of the left do in order to convince the people that progressives in the UK, but also beyond, and particularly having regards with the European Union, are the ones making generally the difference in terms of giving families the means to thrive and making care a societal priority. The floor is yours, Karen.
Thank you so much, Letitia, and it's just such a great pleasure. Hello, London. Hello, Fabians from Bristol. I'm so disappointed not to be there, but I'm just so impressed by how the Fabians have been able to put this together today so that we can all participate. Well done. And it's my first public appearance in this role, coming back to the front bench with Wes and the team, while Liz, my dear friend and brilliant colleague on this issue, is on maternity leave. And the theme is really timely, isn't it? It's one close to my heart, and it is really urgent across Europe, and indeed we're seeing across the United States as we build back from the epidemic, and it is a real public policy imperative. But whilst that's the case, I don't think anybody working in social care could say that this government is rising to the challenge, and instead of the big thinking, innovation, investment that we're starting to see, for example, with the Biden administration, the government are claiming to have fixed social care by dint of that money they have yet to raise, never mind spend through the national insurance hike, but really they're not giving it the attention or the priority it does need. My starting point is simple, that for too long we've all been looking at this upside down. We need to flip the entire conversation and recognise that the change in social care, the change it can make, is about embedding that home first approach, be that your family home, your home for a number of years, or indeed a care home. And as Liz has said very eloquently before, the glaring hole in the current policy debate around care and our government proposals is any inkling of the necessary reforms to boost the quality of both giving and receiving care. In short, what we want to see happening here is our 5-point plan, and that would help by firstly transforming access to care for the 1.5 million elderly people who currently need support into the system, shifting the focus of support to prevention and early intervention and that home first approach. Thirdly, by enabling independence and control for the working age people with disabilities in this country to help ensure that they have the same equal opportunities enjoyed by the rest of the population. Fourthly, by delivering a new deal for care workers and ending that race to the bottom on pay, terms and conditions. And finally, by shaping a new partnership, the theme of this session, with families, helping families balance work and family life. But right now, none of that is possible. And only this week, we saw findings from the National Care Forum showing that care homes are missing 1/3 of necessary staff, which will further compound the current crisis. 1/3 of staff. I mean, it's really quite astonishing. And we have to be clear that this issue is not about Omicron absences. Over half the care worker shortages are long-term vacancies. And the government's failure to fund and secure a future social care workforce piles much more pressure on families. Unforgivably, it also leaves thousands of medically fit people stranded in hospitals, with further pressure being piled on the health service. And although often we talk about the care crisis as silent miseries borne by families, and it doesn't get the attention it deserves, nowhere is the need to change the way we speak about and look to fix social care than the issue of delayed discharge from hospital. And it is always the same. We revert to short-term fixes to get people out of hospital. The narrative says hospital is the solution and the problem, and the money spent and policy levers pulled all focus on the hospital setting. But in truth, we'd go a long way to fixing both the spiraling admissions and spikes in delayed patient discharge with a social service in care service in Labour's mould. Without it, we stand no chance of fixing the ongoing scandal of delayed discharges, and figures published in the Health Service Journal last week showed that are currently around 10,000 medically fit people occupying hospital beds. That is a personal tragedy for every patient in hospital longer than they need to be. And it should be a policy no-brainer to ensure the appropriate support is put in place for those people and their families with social care available to get them home or into supported accommodation. When we are at our most vulnerable, be it physically, mentally, or towards the end of our life, we want the same dignity, respect, power, and autonomy that is afforded to most people for the rest of our lives. And we want it in our home, secure in that home. Good social care should make that possible, supported by the NHS medical care if it's needed, and that absolutely has to be our aim.
Thank you very much, Karin, for strongly making the case. I think this gives us a really good start into the topic, and at the same time, I would like also to remind the audience that we very highly encourage you to engage and to react to what our speakers are going to say in this panel session. So we will be collecting them from the offline but also online audience. And this also brings me now to turn to Polly Toynbee, because I also would like to ask you, also being the voice of the media here and having heard the insights just brought by Kathy, how can we say that care is and should be a core electoral asset of the left?
Well, I think it belongs to the left. Only the left really cares, and only the left has ever really increased it. I want to talk about early years. We're talking about families and family life. Without doubt, the best thing, the very best thing that Labour did when in power was to set up its Sure Start centres. 3,500 of them actually hit that target by the time it left power. I think I was more heartbroken about seeing them being dismantled than almost everything else. I mean, we saw them taking an axe to just about everything, but that was the one that hurt most, partly because I'd personally been very closely involved in the campaign to persuade Gordon Brown and Tony Blair that this was the way forward. And it was Margaret Hodge and Harriet Harman and Tessa Jowell who pushed on every front, saying, well, if you want to get women back to work, this is the way to do it. If you want to, Tessa Jowell, particularly on the health side, if you want to get children a secure health start in life, this is the way to do it. Harriet Harman very much on the equality side, Margaret Hodge on the education side. You know, everything that Keir said today about prevention starts right at the very beginning, as Aisha said today as well. You know, it's the first 2 years of life, the first 1 year of life really that matters. I would like to see Labour basing all its policies on what it does for the family at the very beginning. Because if you do well for them, if you do well for children, if you make a society fit for babies, actually you make a society good for everyone. You make a community, you make a physical environment, a built environment, a natural environment that suits them, suits everybody. And the successes of Sure Start have been measured very thoroughly. One of its good things was it had an extraordinarily thorough monitoring system so as to be able to prove it worked. Unfortunately, it hadn't really been running long enough to get the full impacts, and those impacts are not being followed through. It was based on an American a study that showed that every $1 spent in the first years of life saved 7 later in not sending people to prison, not driving, not using social security, owning their own homes, living in secure families. And I wish we were following through all the beneficiaries of Sure Start in quite that same way. But I think the IFS has picked up quite a lot of it. For instance, IFS recent study shows that Sure Start led to 18% fewer young children ending up in A&E. That's quite a hefty number and something very concrete. What we've been seeing is a reverse of the usefulness of education spending. We spend most on those at university, next on secondary, next on primary, least on where it matters most. The interventions you make at the beginning are far more effective. By the time people have passed their GCSEs, actually what you do to them doesn't make much difference. If you get through those 5 GCSEs, it's pretty much all over for them, either good or bad at that stage. And that prognosis, you can see by the time they get to primary school, by that time they start in reception at primary school. And I would like to see Labour focusing everything and framing everything in the language and terms of what you do for families at the very beginning. For one thing, it has huge public support. If you ask anybody, you know, if you ask opinion polls, what do you think should be done about crime, they all say, sort out families right at the beginning. It's a very popular understanding of social policy. So it would be a popular investment. I'm quite shocked to see the Telegraph reporting that actually what they want to do now is to relax the ratios of staff to children in early years to save money and to make nurseries more affordable. 46% of women are struggling to pay and to get the nurseries that they need. 2,000 of them have closed in the first 3 months of COVID. You know, low pay, poor recruitment and training means that those who might have worked in early years tend to go to work as shelf stackers that pay more. But I think I very much liked Keir's Fabian pamphlet, in which one of the things he put forward I thought was just great, and again resonates. And in a way, it's shocking that you should even have to write it down, that every single child, by the time they leave primary school, should have had the opportunity to play an instrument, join a sports team, visit the countryside, visit the seaside, visit a city, ride a bike, learn how to debate. Now, those are such simple things every middle-class child gets without anybody even questioning or thinking about it. And the fact that there are millions and millions of children who don't get any of those things, and certainly don't get a lot of them, is deeply shocking. And again, I think that's the sort of thing that unlocks the public purse with most voters. It's emotive, it's immediate. They think about their own children, their own grandchildren, and think, yes, that must be the very least a child should have. So I would like to see Labour focus there on the grounds that that's where you tap into most public recognition and understanding. In the same way that child poverty was what Labour focused on last term, wisely, and 1 million children were taken out of poverty. But it garnered public support because people know the children aren't to blame. They may have ideas about whether poor parents are to blame, but they don't blame the children. And so I think this is the place with most leverage and what we should be doing next. And it was very good to see that in Canada, Trudeau won very largely for a very popular platform on cutting the price of childcare, which there costs only £5.70 a day. Unthinkable in this country. And of course, Labour saw the birth rate rise for the first time in a long time because it was an atmosphere that welcomed babies. You may have a view about whether there should or shouldn't be more babies. My view is that people should have as many as they want and not be prevented from having them by the high cost of childcare and bringing them up. The birth rate, of course, has been falling quite dramatically since this government took over. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for this contribution, and I think it nicely complemented the insights from Karin. And here there is no doubt that care eventually has to be a core societal concern. And building up on this, I would like now to turn to Cathy goals. And more particularly in the context of the care crisis that we have been going through, we've seen a renewed interest for all sorts of long-standing feminist economics, care ethics that in which a lot of strands of research have long been denouncing how mainstream and traditional ways of thinking have been all too blind regarding the importance of unpaid work and especially care work, which is mostly concentrated on the shoulders of women, but also the most vulnerable groups of society, with very serious consequences on the participation in the labor market, but also public life in general, with what has been very artificially, let's say, framed as the public-private divide. So taking a life cycle, but also intersectional approach to care, what combination of time, money, and support do children, parents, disabled people, and carers need in order to flourish properly in life? The floor is yours, Katie.
Fantastic, thank you. I'll stand up if that's going to work for our online as well as our in-person audience. So I want to tell you about Kids, that's the charity I run, about our experiences of delivering services for disabled children, young people and families in England, and 3 ideas for how we can change the system to make it work for everyone. Currently, we provide practical and emotional support to 12,000 disabled children, young people and their family members in England. We've been working with families for 50 years, and the most common feedback we get is that the system does not work for them. Somebody said, I want life to be an adventure, instead it's a battle. Whether it's a few hours for your child to have fun in a safe environment tailored for your needs, or it's a place at nursery where there is a massive gap between the 3 hours take up for a disabled child and their family and somebody without disabilities, quite shocking. Or it's the practical support to move with confidence as a young disabled person from being a teenager into adult life. We're a long way from those rights and opportunities being fulfilled. Resources matter, and local authorities don't have the money to meet the needs of every disabled child and their family, but so do the structures and the systems and the attitudes. And I completely agree with what's been said about the early years, and we didn't talk about the contributions, but there's such a strong theme coming out about the under 5s, and I'd add to that, by the way, the negative attitudes some parents to be face when they know they're going to have a child with a disability and they still come, some medical professions will be negative about that, which is appalling and shouldn't happen. So attitudes matter as well. And for us, we embrace the pre-birth support needed as well as the early years. So also I would say the money that is there isn't spent early enough in the family's journey. I'm going to share 3 brief experiences of our services and 3 ideas or actions that would bring us closer to the society that we want. The first experience was when I visited one of our nurseries before the pandemic, and this is a nursery for all children. And I saw how a 4-year-old child who'd newly come to the nursery, who's blind, was being supported by a little boy about her age to go towards the artwork table and do art together. And I was chatting to the manager, who was also telling me about a new learning program she was doing with all the children. She was discovering that all the children, regardless of whether they had a disability or a diagnosis, were not getting enough conversation. So she was adapting the learning program, and of course everybody was benefiting. There's an idea or an action there for us to think about: when is specialism the thing, when is inclusion the thing, and how do they go together? That nursery is a specialism, SEND specialism within an all. And I think we really need to think deeply about the two together. The second experience was a stay and play drop-in for young children, where the children come, and I was down on the carpet. This is the best bit of my job, reading dinosaur books with the under 5s. And I met a child and mother who had experienced extreme neglect. The mother has learning disabilities. She'd been left to fend for herself with a young baby. She was doing her utmost as a mother. And she had literally been found. And what had worked for them was that the child was getting the very specialist support our staff provide. She had global development delay. She wasn't walking, had had that support, and she was now walking. And the mother had been given this nurturing, respectful tips and tools and support around hygiene, a basic stuff, but it was all being done in a respectful and nice environment. I mean, it is a children's centre in effect. And also, this is a place where professionals can come and go, so they can observe the children, the therapists can be there, and all the rest of it. And the experience of that has led us, and many other experiences as well, to start to trial something we're calling a navigator in one part of the country. A very simple idea that every single family with a disabled child has a person, a human being, who's with them, and they're side by side with them, and they're there for them in the journey, and they're helping with the signposting and the navigating the maze, and they're listening to the family, because a lot of families say, we've got a lot of expertise in disability, we know quite a lot about bureaucracy, but we need somebody to be with us along the journey. And the final quick example I'll just share is that during the pandemic, like every other charity delivering services and every other organisation, we adapted fast and furiously. So some of our services we took online, some we maintained face-to-face, some we did a bit of both in one area of the country. And we were really supported when local authorities were able to be flexible with funding. That was helpful. We couldn't do group work. We switched to doing a one-to-one support. One young woman whose mother is also disabled, we were just able to provide the one outing in full lockdown for the young woman who was a wheelchair user to go out in the week. And then we were also able to do some cooking support for the mother who had some needs as well. So I think my action from that and all of our experiences in the pandemic is that services, public services, have changed. They are going to be face-to-face and online, and they're going to be a bit of a mix in future. So how are we going to work together to keep some of that agility that we discovered in the pandemic and really take it forward for the future? And the final thing is to say that the individuals and the families, as I've mentioned, are experts. They're experts in disability, they're experts in bureaucracy, and they're experts in adaptability. And if we want to change the system to make it work better for everyone, we would do well to listen and act on their insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this contribution, once again highlighting the importance of care, but also how complex of an issue it can be and how diverse it is, but also how much we rely on qualified caregivers in that regard. So thank you very much for this. I myself do not see the audience, so I'm not sure if there are people sitting there who wish to react, or because I don't see people's faces. But if it is the case, I just want to remind those of you sitting amongst the virtual but also the physical audience, not to hesitate to raise their hands, and the colleagues present in London will of course let me know should that be the case. In the meantime, I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, and particularly to Ben Cooper. And here, taking a bit of a step back when it comes to the issue of care, and reimagining care also means reimagining and thinking our communities. So that's something I would like to perhaps Ben to focus on in his intervention, whereby adequate care cannot be separate from enriching the neighborhoods and the communities that we inhabit. And many thinkers, such as Vince Segal, Silvia Federici, and many others, have namely been arguing for the importance of a gendered and feminist perspectives on ideas and practices of the commons, as they call it, which implies centering the idea of the community on the very concept of social reproduction, as they label it. So a caring community would, in that sense, enable us to connect and support each other in strong network in our complex needs to mutual dependency, building people's ability to participate in society. So how can we create strong networks of care that support families and in a genuine life cycle approach, from early year services to support at the end of life? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I am slightly concerned that, as Katie said, we appear to have coordinated everything. I'm going to talk about early years as well, and I'm actually going to repeat many of the points that Polly's made. So, yes, it does. So, on this issue of family and care, Labour cannot equivocate. It has to be resolutely pro-family and pro-family life. Going into the next election, the party in the wider left cannot be squeamish when it comes to talking about this. Now, I say this because too often we see, particularly on social media, questions about whether talking about family life is less left-wing or progressive. Now, to me, there can be no question. Standing up for families, supporting family life and strengthening relationships is core to Labour's vision, because our party in government has often harnessed the value of family to a progressive agenda for change. Think of civil partnerships. Think of allowing same-sex couples to adopt, steps taken to ensure thousands more had the chance to enjoy family life and advance LGBTQ+ equality. And when you ask people today what a good life looks like in the 2030s, families and strong relationships are at the core of that. Labour cannot surrender such an important battleground for voters of all ages. After all, it allows the Conservatives to portray Labour as out of touch and anti-family. Indeed, an article last week in the New Statesman by a prominent centre-right policy wonk suggested the bias against the family is deep-rooted in the left's centre self-image. Now, this is utter nonsense, of course, and laughable that the centre-right thinks that the Conservatives have any credibility on this issue. There are now 2 million families with children under 5 living in poverty, and poverty is increasing fastest amongst this group. Families of all ages are experiencing rising financial insecurity and worry even before this current cost of living crisis, and the services that families rely on, particularly from deprived families and families with disabled children, have been run into the ground as their budgets were slashed. But despite all those facts, it's okay, the Conservative Party says, we've introduced a marriage tax allowance, so we get families better than the Labour Party do. Now, the public won't believe it, so we should call it out and position ourselves as the party of family and family life. Now, we'll be building on positives already. Recent polling by the Fabians found Labour leads the Conservative Party on which party is best placed to help families with children. Is one of our biggest brand strengths, and we need to talk about it every day. So one of the most important areas where Labour can ally talking about family and family life to a progressive agenda is early years. So what should Labour propose at the next election to support families? Firstly, It can go further with the New Deal for working people. Rights at work underpin family life by protecting families from exploitation. We should ensure parents can spend more time together as a family with their newborn child and reduce the financial pressures they face in those first few months. Increase compulsory leave, new use it or lose it entitlement, expanded shared parental leave, and substantially increased parental pay should be on the cards. Secondly, Labour needs to reform how we fund childcare and early education. The current system simply doesn't work, not for young children, not for parents, not for those who work in the sector, not for providers, not for the government who wants to use it to reduce inequality and give children the best start in life. We can spend public money better, and that's one of the priorities of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, to deliver universal, affordable childcare, simple to access, effective at tackling educational inequality, and fair for those who work in the sector. Thirdly, Labour needs to have a plan to rebuild Sure Start, not necessarily the brand or the name, but the infrastructure to provide universal help, targeted intervention, and integrated support for families between conception and age 5. Finally, we need a commitment and the leadership to ensure that every public service is dedicated to delivering for families. Let's end the passing of families from pillar to post as they seek the support they need, and which affects families with disabled children the most. This pro-family agenda is politically popular, speaks to the values and demands of the British people, and is a progressive agenda for change. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention, and in fact, very well underlining the need not just to care about care, but to invest in it in order to be able to take it seriously. And now I'm pretty convinced that those of you who are sitting in the audience are bubbling with the need to actually comment, react, and ask questions. So perhaps I would be here handing over to Andy, who I know is in the room, perhaps to help me identify questions in the audience.
Thanks, Andrew. Andrew's got the microphone here. He threw me with this. It's really, I agree with everything you say. And the thing that concerns me most, like particularly Ben and Polly, is what happens to young children as they come through families and into school. And, you know, I'd like to ask what your opinion is of the current government actually cutting the pupil premium in England. They're making stealth cuts to that. We're getting cuts to Sure Start centres, etc. And it occurs to me that if we have any policy, it's going from, and that includes disabled children as well, all the way through and through their school life, and having some continuum of support rather than just have Sure Start stopping at school age, then going into free school meals that doesn't always work, and pupil premium has been diverted by hard-pressed schools anyway. So, and that's been cut as well. So, you know, what have you got to say about that?
Any other questions? Yeah. Anyone want to talk about older people and disabled adults?
Me.
Brilliant,
Yeah.
perfect.
Okay, this is really a quickie for Karen. My background's in social care, and then I worked for 5 years on the Sure Start with the implementation of the Sure Start programme. So I've been very pleased to read your articles about it, Polly. I'm equally dismayed about it. But my point now is really about adult care and how that is funded. Like a lot of my former colleagues, I'm worried much more about the cap, about the floor, than about the cap. It's a slightly arcane point. I'm not asking for a detailed response, but I would just like that to be thought about a bit more. The floor is the amount that your capital goes down to if you're paying for social care. So at the moment it goes down to 23, and the proposal is it goes down to 100. I think it should be higher than that. The problem about a cap, which was what the DILNOT report recommended, so that there was a maximum people paid, is that above that, those people are better off, whatever they set it at, 86,000 or whatever. So I'm sorry about that arcane point, but I just would like Karen to think about that and to take that account. The other one is the extra burden it will place on social services departments about assessing a whole load of people who wouldn't normally come into the purview of social services departments because they will never qualify. They wouldn't have qualified for care, but they will have to be assessed if there's a cap. So I'm not expecting a detailed response, but just a thought that you will take that into account.
I probably won't need this actually.
For the online audience.
Oh, right, okay, sorry. It's a very loud voice. One of the things that we've seen in the media over the last few months is the terrible events of the children who've been killed and abused by parents and step-parents. And I think that this is going to increase because there's completely and utterly a lack of support out there for parents with young children. So much of the support that Labour put in place has now been completely decimated. How do we, if the Labour government gets in power in the next couple of years, please God, how do we start to turn this round, and quickly? Because we are now at a point where it's a very desperate situation. You know, children are being killed, children are dying. I don't think in all my years, I'm a mother and a grandparent and a community activist, I have never seen things so bad.
Thanks very much for that. Yes, you're quite right about the cuts in pupil premium. All I can say is it can be done wonderfully. I visited a school in Newham recently. Something like 95% of the kids there are English, not their first language. Parents often don't speak English, a very, very poor part of Newham. They have had the most brilliant children's centre that runs right through the primary school. And the kids come there, you know, they come there right from babyhood, and they're seen all the way through. It is an outstanding school with the most astonishing results by the time they reach 11, because the same people know them, have cared for them, know those families, bring the families in, have English lessons, help them get jobs, help with any other problems they have, sort things out. And so I would like to see Sure Starts attached to schools all the way through. And that's when you get that complete support network and backup for them, which is terrific, and answers the problem you're talking about, the dangers to children. When there are no eyes on them, nobody's seeing them, no one knowing where they are, what's become of them. The great thing about Sure Start is that there they were. And I would have brought in what somebody suggested, to have every baby registered at your local Sure Start, so they know them right from there, and every parent gets to see what the local Sure Start is, and you plug them in right from the beginning. On the cap, yes, I can see all those problems. It worries me that so much of the money that's meant to be going for social care is going on compensating people who pay for it currently. Dilnot was set that task, but I never felt that the Dilnot problem was the main problem. The main problem is the lack of care, rather than middle class people having to pay out more than they wish out of their inheritances. But you're right about the technicalities on that.
Do you want me to go next, or Karen?
Perhaps to alternate with the virtual speaker, since also some questions were more directly addressed to you, would you like to take over, Karen?
Yes, happy to. And just to say on the early years, I mean, I completely agree. And I myself was an early years governor here. Bristol has a long history of good nursery provision going back to the 1930s. And I was a governor of an early years centre and nursery, very focused on education and development. It's a fantastic achievement and work, and I absolutely agree. And I think families will be at the centre of our proposals, as Keir has indicated. and their loss is one that we're all feeling. And I just put a plug for my predecessor was Dawn Primrolo MP in Bristol South, who learned a lot from Bristol South when she went into government and spent most of that time in the Treasury. Really important to have women in the Treasury, and for a time as well in the Department of Health. But with Rachel Reeves and her knowledge and experience as a woman in this sector as well, absolutely front and centre of what we do. On the cap, as Polly said, look, you know, it is higher than deal not, as we've said, and in response, as Liz Kendall said, it's our test is it fair and does it work? And it doesn't look like it does work, and it's certainly not fair currently. And as the questionnaire said, the bureaucracy and the processes now, which will fall on local government, look really, really troublesome. The impact assessment has been sneaked out only this week. It's 139 pages long. I confess to only having read it once, and we'll be working on the detail of that very much in the next week or so to understand the impact on local authorities. But it is all about the assessment and also about the stabilisation of the care sector. And I think as Polly indicated in talking about early years, the government seemed to want to reduce the cost in the sector by bringing down pay even further and bringing down that child to staff ratio, as in social care. And as I indicated in my comments, the workforce is the greatest problem facing us currently. We're seeing that with the virus particularly, but it was there before, and we can't do anything in these sectors without addressing the issue of pay, terms and conditions, career progression for those workers in the care system, and making the experience of giving and receiving care much better quality.
Thank you very much for your answers on this aspect. And I saw that Ben was also ready to take the floor to come in. So would you like to give a couple of compliments on the questions?
Okay. I'll probably take the social care question first because it's the question I know least about, so I can deal with it the quickest. For me, you know, someone who comes at it as a relative novice to this policy, the tax rise is probably the biggest problem for me. It's probably the one that I can understand the easiest as well. It's, I don't think, acceptable that when we have significant wealth inequality, the way to fund social care is to use a tax on jobs and national insurance. I think we need to be shifting the burden of taxation generally, not just for social care, more onto wealth and less on to income. I'm afraid I don't have an answer beyond that, but I hope that was... well, I suppose the other aspect actually that is important is talking about working age people who need social care. The government has, as far as I can see, no real plan on working age social care, and that matters particularly, I think, for disabled people who want to get a job, who want to, you know, live with independence, live lives that we all take for granted, I suppose, at the moment. So that is definitely a challenge, and I know that Liz Kendall, and I'm sure Karen, is focusing on working age people who need social care. So on the question around cuts to pupil premium and support, one of the biggest issues actually is that the early years pupil premium is substantially lower than the school pupil premium, and that does not make any sense whatsoever. At the very least, it should be inverted or the same, and that is necessary. There's also, the government has got this new family hubs programme that currently amounts to, I think, about 120 family hubs, which is nowhere near the 3,000 sure starts that we had in 2010. Their big idea is to have it between 0 to 19. I'm very sceptical about that, not least because parents with young children are not going to want to be in the same room as families with adolescent teenagers. Therefore, the benefits, the supposed benefits of, you know, bringing services together is actually not going to happen because families are not going to want to be necessarily in the same room. You're going to have a distinct part of the building that is for early years, and that creates barriers. So I think Sure Start should be, or whatever Labour pushes forward, should be 0 to 5, and then it needs to focus on schools and making sure schools are the places where you access support. from the community, from other public services. Then on vulnerable children, you know, this is, I suppose, a consequence of austerity. You know, when public services are running at 100 million miles an hour because there's so few of them, gaps will form between services, and vulnerable children will fall down them, and therefore they don't get the support they need. So, for example, health visitors, a lot of health visitors now will have caseloads of over 100 children. How do they spend the time needed to make sure that parents are supported, but also to make sure that kids are safe? So Labour needs to invest in the health visiting service and also other services that make sure that cases that we've seen don't happen again.
I'll just pick you up on something. I don't pick you up, and I'm rather ask you, because you may know. You said we shouldn't use Sure Start again. My impression is that Sure Start has a hugely positive and well recognised, universally. I think we need to be careful to do the polling on this to see whether that's so or not before you abandon it. Are you sure that it's a negative or plus?
I don't think it's a negative. I think it's more of a people don't know it because it's been so long since we've had Sure Start, being very prominent across the country. People don't know what it is. So I think Labour should focus on the services first and then necessarily the branding, because where I live, they are children and family centres. If you go over the local authority border, they're children's centres. So there could be a way of bringing it all together around a brand. I'm not 100% certain Sure Start is the phrase. I'm not a marketing guru. It may necessarily, if they do a focus group, and I do love a focus group, and they find Sure Start is the name, I will change my opinion and say that Labour should use the phrase Sure Start. But I think it should start with the services and the funding first, make sure that's right in the manifesto, then the name comes second.
Ben, did you move? You're blocking the back out.
Am I in the way of...
You're in front of Catherine.
Does Katie perhaps want to complete before we finish this first round?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be brief. So I agree with the point about the continuum of support. That's essential. All families, whether your child is disabled or not, talks about the importance of support of those transitions, whether it's primary to secondary school, whether it's nursery to primary school, or whether it's the 16 to 17-year-old, what's the next part of your life? So that's essential. What we see is that disabled children are being excluded from schools quite unnecessarily, had the support been there in place. So when we're looking at issues that you were raising, we've got to look at the alternative provision. One of the things my charity does is go into schools. We do lunch clubs, Lego therapy for disabled children who are at risk of being excluded. It's about getting in there early. And I just want to give a shout out on your very important point about abuse and neglect. So I want to give a shout out to childminders, who I think are an essential part of the fabric of our society. My daughter's, we had a childminder. My daughter's life is I can't even express what the difference that the childminder made from 9 months old right through to 12. And coming back to disabled children, many childminders now, they're acquiring a special educational needs specialism so that they can support disabled children or children of all kinds of backgrounds. Again, a really lovely example then where you've got very young children from all backgrounds, disabilities, not disabilities, starting life together.
Well, that would give us the occasion to go for a second round of questions. So I would like to hand over back to Andrew. I see some hands raised there.
This is a question possibly for Karen, not about children, about adults and social care. You mentioned how understaffed all of those centres are. Can we take the opportunity of restaffing them with properly paid people, but properly qualified, well-paid people? If you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. there's no point in paying the same monkeys more money, because they will still be monkeys.
Thank you. Hi, I'm the, can you hear me okay? I'm the lead member for Children's Service and Education at Bedford Borough Council. I'd just like to both agree and disagree with some of the points that Ben has made. I think you made a really good point about families and Labour, that we should be seen as being pro-family. I think it is a problem for us at the moment. For some reason, we're not. I find that sometimes on the doorstep, actually, just knocking on doors. And people have said to me, you don't believe in families, or even you want to destroy family life, or you want to interfere with the family. Really strange things that people come out with. I think it comes from the right-wing press, basically. And I think it's partly because there's a confusion because of our liberal traditions that we support different types of families, more diverse families, and that's seen as an attack on the family. But I think you made a really good point there about Labour being pro-family. Where I wouldn't quite so much agree with you is about Sure Start. Certainly in my authority, we've maintained children's centres. So okay, that's a different word, but the principle is the same. So in other words, that's places where you have parents and children coming together. So it's to benefit both the parents and the children. And there's a variety of services. And health visitors, for example, are encouraged to come in to give initial jabs to children and so on, to attract parents and children in. And I think it works extremely well. So I would agree with Polly that we might not call them Sure Start any longer, but the principle's there. And I think they are popular. I mean, the problem that we have is that we don't get paid for that stuff. So in other words, we get the recompense for the statutory services, the sort of things that the lady over there referred to, in other words, protecting children under the various Children's Acts. So under Section 47 of the Children's Acts, we have to step in to protect people. Tragically, that didn't work in 2 cases recently, but what we don't get paid for is for early help. So we have to fight for that money for all sorts of early help, including aspects of early years. But I would say yes. You know, we might not call them we might not call it Sure Start any longer. But I think in principle we need to carry on that activity.
Thank you. My question is really about an area of policy that I think is very relevant to the family, but hasn't really been covered, which is housing. We've seen the housing market develop over the last 20 years, massively rising prices and the crisis of affordability, a reduction in council housing sold off. So a large part of the population, the working population, is now stuck in the rented sector with very limited security of tenure, often dealing with private landlords and an inability to create sort of a secure home and a long-lasting home and sort of plan and build in their communities. And it strikes me that Labour has to talk about that, because that is the experience of a lot of people in this country, and we just seem to be absolutely silent on it.
Thank you very much for these questions. I don't see any hands raised anymore, so perhaps we can move back to the speakers. And also, as we are slowly coming to an end of this session, I would as we are slowly also moving to an end of this session, I would suggest that the speakers at the same time combine this with their concluding and take-home messages for the final wrap up, and perhaps starting this time the reverse. So perhaps I suggest to give the floor first to Katie, and then we do it backwards.
Thank you. Yeah, just 2 final points from me. So we've been talking about early help, and it was very powerful to hear your point about what local authorities have money to do and what they don't do. And the charity that I run, like many other charitable providers, are in a situation where we don't have the funds to do those vital services, and it's because they're not there in the local authority areas. There's something fundamental here about what is valued and what is an essential. So for disabled children and their families, short breaks or activity breaks, a few hours for the child to do good stuff, good fun stuff, and for the families to have a break from the medical, the caring, the responsibilities, that's an essential. It's not a luxury. And if that support is there, it is also cheaper in the long run, because the family is much less likely to fall into crisis. And in the extreme cases, a child will end up being cared for by the local authority or by sent out of borough. So it's just this theme, I think, a very strong theme today about the early help and what we really value and what we think is essential and not a luxury. And then the final point is that the government is going to be consulting on a SEND review, on a special educational needs review. It's really important that that looks not only at education, but at health and care, and is really kind of wrapped around. And the reason I say that is because most children go to school, but they don't spend all their life at school. And when we're talking about disabled children and young people and families, we've got to think, as we all do, about all of our life and how all of our life is lived. And so I hope you can be strong voices to make sure, and put pressure on the government to make sure that it's a holistic review and it's looking at all the parts of life. In March.
Yeah, over to you, Ben.
So I suppose the first point around why do people think Labour doesn't like families, I think is perhaps part of a longer standing problem that the Labour and the left has, which is making sure the public understand what it wants to do. So we are doing a piece of work specific on climate change, which shows that the way that the left talks about climate change isn't the way that the public conceive and want the left to talk about climate change, because it's seen as too high up, too distant from daily life, too unbelievable, too grand promises. And I think Labour falls into that trap, has fallen into that trap, and the leadership is moving away of not having simple, believable, concise policies. So, for example, our Early Years Commission has made a recommendation that said there should be paid leave for parents to attend hospital appointments, or if there's a significant change in their child's medical condition. That is simple to understand. Every parent will understand why paid leave is important, and it will actually make sure that no parent is left behind or is left worse off for doing the right thing by their kid. So it's simple, believable policies will start to shift the approach or the perception that people have of Labour when it comes to family. On the Sure Start issue, so Sure Start was absolutely transformational, yes. It's just, again, it's making sure we focus on what do we want Sure Start or whatever we call it to do, rather than just going, right, we need to go back to Sure Start. We need to learn from what other countries are doing. So there's an excellent example in Sweden. Their version of a health visitor brings pregnant mums that are expected to give birth around the same time into a community group, and then the health visitor runs it for the first year, and then they basically go off and they meet repeatedly after that. That is great for tackling loneliness amongst new mums. We need to be looking and making sure we're innovating along those lines, learning from around the world, rather than just going, right, what Labour needs to do is go back to Sure Start. Then in terms of housing, I realise we're running out of time, so I can't give you a full answer. Housing is absolutely critical, whether it's private rented sector, affordability of purchasing your home, ageing society. There's not enough homes for disabled people that are accessible. That needs to change. And then if Labour has a radical housing policy, that will also be a pro-family approach.
Ahead, Karen, would you like to come in, answering to the questions, whilst also offering your final remarks?
Yes. I mean, the one thing just to say that we haven't really picked up on that has certainly driven much of my interest in this area, that lots of this is around women's role in society. It is women that are the receivers as older people of the majority of older people's care. It is middle-aged women, women of my own age doing this currently that are supporting our families, both younger and older generations. So many women in their 50s and 60s having to give up work in order to provide the free care for their families, thus plunging families further into poverty, and overwhelmingly young women working as care workers, underpaid, undervalued, that are propping up the system. And it's undoubtedly our historical role in society that has meant that the silent misery of care continues, because it's seen as women's work and it should be done for free. It is an infrastructure issue. It should be considered alongside all other infrastructure issues. And virtually every business, everyone I know who I work with is struggling through, particularly the pandemic, and having to take time out to support families. And that's the lens through which we should be seeing this, which is why in my fourth point that I outlined about our PAN, that delivering a new deal for care workers is central to what we do in the future. Housing absolutely is part of that as well. The types of housing we need to embed that home first approach will be really key. I guess my point that I hope I tried to get across in my comments is really about the quality of both the giving of care and the receiving of care, and the need for us to flip the conversation around the crisis in health and social care, so that we recognise that support to individuals, families and community where we want to live, the dignity we expect throughout our lives, has to be embedded in our systems thinking, and support that wider system and help us to live the fulfilling lives and the security that we all want. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, Karen, also for stressing the very much gendered nature of the care crisis, but also how much the issue of vulnerability when it comes to care is something that concerns everyone, and how much we are all interdependent. So I highly appreciate this insight. And last but not least, Polly, you have the final words.
Thank you. Just a few minutes. Housing. Brilliant report last week. It was only reported in the FT, but I'm going to pick it up. Parliamentary committee. The Help to Buy scheme cost 29 billion. It did nothing but inflate the house prices, and it did nothing but help those who were going to buy their homes anyway, possibly buy them a little quicker. Absolutely did nothing to redistribute home ownership in any meaningful way. And this is NAO stuff. This is, shocking. And of course, Labour needs a really strong housing policy that is about social housing, because there's no point in subsidising. We've experimented with that. There's no point in subsidising the ownership market. All of that money has to go into council and housing association. Finally, just want to say, I think everything Ben said about family and Labour as being part of the family is brilliant. I think the days are over when Labour is, seen as being somehow anti-family, because those battles have been won by Labour. Tories have adopted civil partnerships, marriage, gay adoption, all of those things. There isn't really another issue there that is contentious between the parties as to what a family is. And of course, Labour has always been the party of the family, because it's been the only party that's ever really supported it in the meaningful ways that we've talked about, either financially or through these, the first party to produce nurseries, care, and all of that, as well as doing best on social care.
Thank you very much, honourable speakers, to each and every one of you. From the bottom of my heart, it has been a pleasure and a delight to moderate and to chair this session. I think there could have been no better way of closing this discussion with your very clear, precise and concrete messages, which I have no doubt will leave all of us strengthened and empowered with fresh, progressive ideas on how to actually better care for people, care for children, and simply care for care. So thank you very much, and I wish you an excellent continuation of today's conference.